So, the new 2017 Thomas movie, Journey Beyond Sodor, has now come out. From the minute this movie came out, everybody wanted to hate it. They said it looked terrible. The animation looked bad. The story seemed stupid. But it came out and a lot of people really seemed to like it. I am not one of those people. The movie is by no means terrible by writing standard. I wouldn't compare it to the likes of Thomas and the Magic Railroad or Misty Island Rescue, because it did have a lot of good moments. However, I feel that it had aspects to it that poisoned the entire thing, and no amount of clever writing could save that, because it was fundamentally broken, and I take more issue with the aspects of this film than any previous Thomas film. Let's compare it to some of the other Thomas movies by using food as a comparison. If The Adventure Begins were a birthday cake, and Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure were a steak dinner, and The Great Race is a cream cheese sandwich on white bread, Journey Beyond Sodor is like a great dinner made of a type of food that you're allergic to. It's good on its own, and people that don't have the allergy or are not very critical of it would think that it's great. But if you look deeply into it, and if you analyze it, you'll find that it's potentially deadly. Let me explain. The movie actually starts off very strongly. I very much like the opening, although it's weird because the opening is all about explaining the island of Sodor, even though this is a movie that doesn't primarily take place on Sodor. It feels a little out of place to so heavily introduce the location that the movie doesn't really have for most of it. It also has a very strong opening featuring a crash scene with Henry, which is unfortunately horribly ruined by the stupid slow-motion gag. It wasn't funny in Lost Treasure, it wasn't funny in Useful Railway, it wasn't funny in The Great Race, and it wasn't funny here. Let's take note from the hit era of the show and learn that slowing down crashes does not make them better. And now in CGI, they think it's funny every single time to slow down the crash, so we can hear the character go, "Whoa!" It's not funny. It's stupid, and it detracts from the moment. There's also a very cool intro featuring all of this molten steel forming all of the rails of Sodor. It's really cool. It's creative. I like it a lot. And then the movie starts, and this is where it becomes problematic very quickly. See, this is another one of those musicals they keep trying to do, and I gotta tell you, I'm not loving the music. I think some of the songs are relatively catchy, but the lyrics are awkward and the songs are entirely too frequent. They weren't as bad during The Great Race because there weren't very many songs in that movie, even though it technically is a musical, but they're constant in Journey Beyond Sodor, and they don't really add to the story. They feel more like interruptions. They slow down everything. You want to skip through them. The songs themselves, some of them are pretty good. I really like the song about the steelworks, the hottest place in town. But others, especially Who's Thomas, are just incredibly awkwardly written, and they have a lot of weird rhymes where they rhyme words with themselves, and there's just no reason for them to be there. To very quickly summarize the story, essentially, after Henry crashes, James is supposed to take the train to the mainland that Henry was originally supposed to take. James, however, is bragging about being Sir Topham Hatt's favorite engine, and Thomas is jealous and ends up stealing the train away from James and taking it to the mainland instead, where he gets lost. And he ends up finding the island of misfit toys of sorts, which is I don't know what it is. Is it its own railway? I'm getting some strong Misty Island vibes from the experimental engines area, because the experimental engines, I feel, are one of the greatest weaknesses of the movie. I very much like the Steelworks characters. I like Hurricane and Frankie. I think that they're interesting, fresh ideas for characters that work pretty well, but you're supposed to dislike them, or they're antagonists. The experimental engines, however, are supposed to be likable, but they're not, in my opinion. I find Lexi to be the worst character in this movie. She's incredibly grating. She's irritating. She doesn't add anything to the story. I like Theo. I'm happy that his voice doesn't sound like a child's as I expected it to. He kind of gave me vibes of the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, if anyone knows what I'm talking about. But the experimentals, again, don't really add much, and I don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. Do they have their own railway? They're just kind of making a mess. And I'm reminded very much of Misty Island from this. It's just kind of this railway that exists for no reason, that does something, and there's people there, I guess, but it doesn't make any sense. It's never explained why they're there. Why are these experimental engines together in one place somewhere in the forest? I find myself just constantly questioning things that are happening in this movie, and it takes me out of it constantly. If this were a standalone movie, it would be okay, but the fact that this is part of the Thomas universe means that I'm operating on the logic of the old universe and trying to apply it to this movie that is obviously supposed to be a separate reality from the previous films. So I'm just confused. And I think that's why some people like this movie so much, is they're able to more quickly move forward than I am, because I'm still operating on the season 20-ish logic. This movie feels more like a cartoon. It's so unrealistic. Oh my god, this is the most unrealistic Thomas movie. Well, that's difficult to quantify, but there are so many one-in-a-million things happening. It's very frustrating, because a lot of people really seem to like this movie. And if you liked this movie, that's great for you. I have nothing against you if you liked this film. However, I genuinely do believe that if you have zero qualms with this film, then you lack some kind of fundamental understanding about how the Thomas universe is supposed to work. Because this movie doesn't work in the Thomas universe. It has to constantly break the rules, the established rules of this universe, in order for the plot to happen. And you can't do that. It's okay if this were a standalone film, if this were part of the Cars franchise or something, that would be fine. Because this movie has its own logic that is not consistent with any of the previous logic that has been established. After Thomas goes to the mainland, the plot very quickly falls apart. It becomes very muddled and slow and messy and confusing. I like the part after he gets away from the experimental engines and goes to the steelworks and spends some time there, because the film does take a darker turn, which I, of all people, can appreciate, but it's very, very slow. And I haven't even mentioned the most pointless character in this film, Beresford, who adds absolutely nothing to the story. For some reason, this movie is 70 minutes long, and if they had just cut out Beresford and a couple of the pointless, redundant musical numbers, this could have easily been a trim 60 minutes or less. It would have been much more concise, much tighter, and there would be less to complain about. Also, it would be over faster, which I would appreciate. But why this movie, of all movies, to get an extended runtime? Why not Legend of the Lost Treasure, which I love that movie, but it's very rushed at parts because it only had so long. If any movie should have been 70 minutes, it would have been Lost Treasure, but for some reason it's this one. Beresford has like 3 scenes in this movie, and all of them could have been removed. Of all the characters that just break all of the rules of this universe, I feel that Beresford is perhaps the most egregious, because he's this huge crane in just the middle of nowhere who has no established role or purpose, as is the case with almost every character in this movie. Why are they there? Why is the mainland so desolate, so barren? It feels like a forest. Where are all the houses and buildings? Is this really supposed to be England? I've never been to England, but this certainly isn't what it looks like. It looks like the American countryside. It looks like Illinois or something. It's very hard to comprehend. There are so many... Everything that Beresford does is frustrating to me. The way that he moves... And that's another... I haven't even gotten to the animation yet of this movie, which is a whole separate ordeal. but the way that he moves and the way that he picks things up with his one little hook claw, there's a scene where he lifts Thomas up in the air by the edge of his cab with just a hook, and it's so frustrating. I just can't understand how people in good conscience, and I understand that Mattel is running things to the point where the writers have very little freedom at this point with these films. But how can anybody see this and think this is consistent with the universe that we've established? How can anyone see this and think this is okay? This isn't Thomas. This is a cartoon. And I understand that it's animated, but that doesn't excuse it. The fact that it's animated with computers should mean that the potentials are limitless. It should be an excuse for the animation to be more realistic, closer to real life, not less. This is just silly. I've praised Ark for doing something that Nitrogen didn't, which is take advantage of the CGI. But this isn't the right way to take advantage of it. Thomas is not supposed to be a cartoon. That's the charm of it. That's why the franchise has lasted for 72 years. It's realistic. And that's a trait that most, if any, children's programs don't have. It feels like it could have happened in real life. And when you remove that, when you make it a silly cartoon, it takes me out of it and it ruins my experience, because I didn't feel like I was watching a movie that was made for everybody, the way I do with films such as Lost Treasure. I felt like I was watching a children's film. And that's why I have difficulty critiquing this movie, is it's so obviously made for such a young audience that it's difficult for me to even talk about it critically, because I feel like I'm dissecting an episode of Blue's Clues or something. It's very clearly not made for me, and no other part of the Thomas franchise feels like that, except for the hit era, but that's a whole separate thing. The plot just falls apart. The climax of the movie is this whole thing in the steelworks where everybody's fighting. I still don't understand what's happened. I've watched that scene like 3 times. There's no tension. There's no weight to it. You don't feel like the characters are in danger. It just goes full cartoon. The end, it just makes no sense. Thomas gets picked up by a giant magnet and is about to be dropped into this boiling steel, and then a bucket comes out of nowhere and hits him, and he falls, and then he lands on the... It's just so stupid. It's so stupid. It's frustrating to me, and that's about all that happens in the movie. Now, if this were consistent with the animation style of Misty Island Rescue or The Great Race or whatever, then it would be one thing. This movie would probably be about a 5 or 6 out of 10 for me, just because it does have I like a lot of the moments of this movie. Don't get me wrong, I know I've complained about it a lot, but I genuinely feel that this movie has a lot of good moments. Like, there's a scene where James goes to this shunting yard on the mainland and he sees the diesels that were in The Great Race, those red and yellow diesels, and it's this fun little scene. There's a lot of nice little moments, little callbacks, nice little parts, but the fundamental flaw of this movie is that it's inconsistent with the universe that we've established. And that brings me to the biggest point of contention for this film, which is what people have dubbed the bouncing, or it's not really bouncing, it's more like leaning. Basically, if you've seen the Cars movies, the engines now move like that, essentially, where this never used to happen before. When the engines are speaking, when they emote, now in this movie they lean on their chassis. They're very expressive. Their whole body moves, and that just completely flies in the face of everything that Audrey created. This universe is supposed to be 100% realistic, except for the fact that the engines have faces, and even that is incidental. The fact that the engines are sentient is not meant to affect the story. It's supposed to be an addition to a story. The point of Thomas was to tell stories that happen on real railways, but personify the engines so children could be interested in the story more. But the fact that the engines are now suddenly moving, this change has been abruptly made with no explanation, it ruins the movie for me. It genuinely does. And I'm sorry if I sound like I'm nitpicking, but this is a major deal to me. This fundamentally changes everything about the Thomas universe for the worse. And honestly, I don't know if I can keep watching the show if it goes on in this direction. I audibly cringed every time something happen, where the engines are moving. And something I noticed, the bouncing is rather inconsistent. There are some scenes where there's no bouncing, or there's very little. And other times, it seems like every time a character says a word, they go like this. It's very weird to me that they would, when this movie clearly had a rushed production schedule because of the brief arc shutdown jam-filled thing that happened last summer, when they were obviously rushing to finish this thing, why did they bother to take this extra step of adding the bouncing animation, which ruined the movie for me? And some people really like it. They say it adds to the expressiveness of the engines. Well, I'm sorry, but you're missing the point. The engines are expressive because they're steam engines. You're personifying them too much. You're making them too human when you make them so expressive with their bodies. The way a steam engine expresses itself is through steam and through motion. That's what Audrey wanted. When Audrey was a child, he could see the emotion in steam engines from the way they moved. And that is what Thomas is about. It's about appreciating the beauty of locomotives. And this is just tarnishing that. This is making them human, which was never supposed to be what this was about. We're just moving further and further from this being a celebration of railways and more of just pandering. There is this obvious attempt at just dumbing down and just simplifying everything for younger and younger children, and it's frustrating for me. It's very frustrating for me because I'm trying to enjoy this as a much older person than is really meant to be watching the show, and this has always been a defensible position because it used to be written for everyone. And now, it's so clearly being pandered to such a young audience that I feel very stupid trying to criticize it. Again, it's like trying to criticize Blue's Clues. I'm sure Blue's Clues is good, don't get me wrong, but it's like trying to criticize a show that's literally made for babies. And that is my problem with this movie, is the animation, which is good in some places and horrible looking in others, but it's a combination of the cartooniness of the way everything is animated and performed, and it just feels so stupid. I really felt like I was watching something that is not part of the Thomas universe, and I can only hope that these characters don't appear again, and we can just wash this out of our heads. We have yet to see definitive footage of Series 21 that will answer whether or not the bouncing is going to continue, but I am fearful it will, and I see the series moving in a very dark direction. I see this film as an omen of things to come, and I am not optimistic for the future. If you liked this movie, then congratulations, but I thought it was okay as a story, but the inner details of it poisoned the whole thing. And I don't know where to go from here.